just like clockwork, a 26-year cycle that's been playing out since the 1900s is about to give us a massive blow off top. This means an explosive alt season far greater than every other bull run we've had so far combined. And what's honestly even crazier, the last time we had this explosive blow off top was actually for the dot-com bubble back in 2000. So in this video, you are going to find out far more about this hidden 26-year cycle that's been playing out perfectly over the last 100 years, and most importantly, what that means for your altcoins. Now, let me say right now, if this excites you as much as it is exciting me, I want you guys to demolish that like button, just like you were buying your favorite altcoins right now on a massive discount. And of course, if you are new around here, first of all, welcome. If you want more of this content throughout this bull run period, make sure you're subscribed, but importantly, with that bell turned on. You don't want to miss any of the updates on this cycle. Now, to my shock, you wouldn't believe when I found this cycle, playing out a few months ago, I couldn't believe I searched everywhere online. I couldn't find any discussions, any articles, or any even hints of this cycle anywhere else. So it's truly important you do subscribe because you just simply will not be getting this information elsewhere. Apart from the private community, of course, I keep you guys updated in there as much as I possibly can. So what is this cycle? Okay, this cycle, to cut a long story short, is essentially a 26.5-year cycle. Okay, we're rounding down, which happens here in the S&P, but has started in the Dow Jones way back. Actually, as a matter of fact, we're going to go back to the early 1900s here, back to 1919, but we can actually trace this as far back as even down here, okay? So essentially what this is every 26.5 years, we have a cycle high. So I'll start back here in 1919. We have a cycle high, which I will put in right here, okay? So we have the blow off top moment here for the cycle. But before this, what precedes it is we have usually a period here in this sort of teal color where we've had a low, we've pumped up quite a bit, and I can talk percentages here because each cycle's percentages are roughly speaking the same. So we have about a 35% pump here. We then have this yellow zone, which occurs over a few months, in which we fall roughly between 10 to 20%. You can see we fell 10% in this period. And then we had a pump from the break of the previous high over here, this local high, okay? We pumped 33%. Now this 33% came, it was an all-time high for this last 26.5 years, and then we had a crash. Now this is the most important part of this. The pump comes before a huge crash. Now this huge crash normally is about 50%. So this here you can see here was 46.5%. So now we fast forward. This is the S&P. Most of you should know the S&P itself wasn't really established. It's officially until the 1940s, 1950s. So this information we have back here is actually from the Dow Jones itself. So coming back to the S&P, this point right here is actually this 1919 period here. It looks like there was a higher high somewhere over here, right? A cycle high, but that was actually in fact incorrect. This was that cycle high. We fast forward now to the roaring 20s, okay? The only thing I must say about this is the roaring 20s itself. So after World War I, we saw an industrial boom around the world and we had pure euphoria. This was the only outlier for this single cycle. And I do consider it an outlier, not part of the cycle, simply because, again, it was pure euphoria. It came after a world war. Things expanded very, very quickly. And then we had, of course, the Great Depression. So that is, I believe, a little different to the cycle. But needless to say, 26.5 years after, to be exact, 9,700 days later, okay, we had this, which was the 1946 high. Again, we have that same characteristics of that teal color here after finding a low. All right, the teal goes up. We had a 13% crash. Remember over here, we had a 11% crash, so much of a muchness. As a matter of fact, this here was a little bit larger than previous. But once we broke through that high, you can see over here, it was a 50% pump, with the only outlier here being a measly, so that lightly, right, 30% crash from the highs. If we ignore the roaring 20s, run up there in the crash, this was the cycle high of this 26.5 years. You see it just edges this period here out, excluding this. Now, this is where things get a lot crazier. It's been very, very, very accurate since the 1940s, pretty much the establishment of the S&P. So again, just like clockwork, okay, we had 9,700 days later, 26.5 years, pretty much to the dot. If I zoom in, okay, we're now at 1973. We had the cycle high reached here. Okay, you can see that there. And if I zoom in, again, we had a high. Okay, we've come down here, we found a low. we pumped around 50%. We had a drop of 15%. Very similar to before. This happened over a few months. And then, of course, we went up, but particularly from that high, we actually went up 15%. So not quite the 30%, a little bit less, but we still had a blow off top, which preceded a 50% crash again. And we again look just a little bit more than 26 and a half years. This was actually a couple hundred days longer. Okay, so 9,900 days here. We had the notorious .com bubble, right? So this one was a bit different. We didn't kind of come down and then come up again, all right, and do this. We kind of were already up. So we had a massive run up here in teal, which kind of came after a massive 168% move. We then fell down, all right, 22%. And then we went up 30% again when we broke through that sort of high over here. The last 12 months of the .com bust, so from 1999 to 2000, which is when this imploded, was that last euphoria part of the .com bubble. Again, we saw a 50% crash, just like clockwork. Now, again, this was a little bit different, right? We had kind of like a much larger run up here. But of course, those of you who also know the fact that the .com bubble itself was more than just the last 12 months. It was multi-year, okay? Now, if I scroll into where we are right now, okay, we're on the weekly time frame, so I will switch back to monthly just so you guys can keep track of the rough time frames. Okay, we've had that high, we've come down. In teal now, we've run up about 75%, so pretty on par with the roughly 50-60% we saw in previous cycles. We've now fallen down 21%, and now we've once again broken through the previous high. Okay, so right here. We are literally at S&P all-time highs as we speak. So a 30% jump from here would actually, coincidentally enough, put us at exactly 8,000 on the index score, which is a nice round number, sure. It could be less. I'm not saying it's going to be exactly 30%. Okay, it could be 15%, but history says anywhere between 15% and 30%, which would be anywhere between, again, 7,000 and 8,000 on the score, followed by a possible 50% crash. So a 30% move in this last final push over the next possible 12 months here is going to have a much larger impact on our altcoins than what it would here actually going up 30% in the S&P. Now, hold on for 1 minute because I want to mention altcoins here in just a second after I break a few more things down, because I think what's possible here is, again, some just mind-bending numbers, really. Now, look, I'm confident this will play out, but I'm not certain. You should never be certain in markets. There's no such thing. But based on how we've been reacting so far with the massive wick down here on the monthly candle, instantly shooting back up again, and again playing out to the rough same tune and even percentages as before, it is kind of crazy, all right? It's kind of coincidental. And sometimes if that coincidence has happened over the last 100 years, you've got to ask yourself why. But there's also some massive updates here regarding other macro factors as well that does support a blow-off moment for Bitcoin and altcoins, like the chart behind me. The chart behind me is the DXY, or the dollar index, for the US. And it's this chart, okay, you can see every time it falls back in Trump's first term in 2017 here from the same tariffs. It helped, I think, cause that massive blow off top for Bitcoin. The same thing with the pandemic over here helped shoot us into that early first push before that second and final all-time high. Also, the bank fell over here early 2022, and now we're seeing that same level crash in the DXY again, like we saw back in Trump's first term, okay, to the rough same percentages, and it is still falling. Not to mention, global liquidity, yeah, this nice yellow line that everyone's talking about, of course, in crypto at the moment, it's still going up. It's literally still putting in all-time highs. It just does not want to stop. So when we combine both of these, we get a chart like this. And when you actually combine the two and have a look at correlations between them, the same patterns are playing out in the sense that you can see here back in these green zones, back in 2013, back in 2017, and back in 2021, the DXY falling whilst we have global liquidity going up, again, is playing out, right? DXY falling, global liquidity going up, DXY falling, global liquidity going up. Okay, chopping here for a while, but of course, we have the DXY falling and global liquidity going up. And I do think once Bitcoin breaks out of this upper trend line over here, like it did at the exact moment here, also over here, and not to mention, of course, back in 2014, that will cause a massive siren for alt season. But there is a but. It's a big but. Okay, that kind of sounds bad. Either way, it's interest rates. US interest rates right now have been the highest we've experienced in any crypto bull market. And we've come pretty far, I think, considering just how high they have been. Okay, so the argument of like, Kyron, well, we had interest rates hiking over here in the 2017 bull market. Okay, what makes this bull market any different? Okay, which is this period right here. The difference is that at the actual high, we had an interest rate here of around 1.5%. Whereas right now, the interest rates, while they are high, They're at like 4.5% right now. Okay, you can see right here. So the difference between 1.5% and 4.5% is a lot. So I think, I'm not too sure on the exact number it needs to fall. Okay, but when it does start to fall, I do think as that happens, we will see, risk on markets going up, because what's going to happen at that point is we're going to have economies spurring up because people can borrow, lending starts, of course, and then we have people spending money. That's where we make our money. When people start going, I got an extra few $100 this week, I've paid the mortgage because the mortgage is cheaper thanks to interest rates being lower, and therefore they're going to throw their money into, pumping up our favorite bags, right? Now, this chart behind me is also pretty important in that as well, because this is looking at central banks, and they follow a very cyclical cycle where they kind of hike, cut, hike, cut. So in green here, they're actually cutting. In red, they're hiking, or they're pushing rates higher. And they, again, follow a very similar cycle year after year. Roughly every 3 to 4 years, they'll move the rates. And you can see here in green, it's about time they start dropping interest rates. Okay, but the most important one of all, the US over here, they are really kind of late to the party. And this is the biggest consumer-based country and economy in the world. When the US is on board, everything else starts going up. That's why most economists and also us crypto and macro degens, we talk about the US because the US has to come online for markets to really, I think, glow up and blow up. All right, so we got the boring stuff out the way, and I hope you understand just how insane this 26.5-year cycle is playing out. But not just that, how the DXY is falling, how we have global liquidity going up, and honestly, kind of like the things we're waiting for here, which I think the most important is interest rates to fall, particularly in US interest rates, right? But if you're asking the question, what about Bitcoin dominance? What about altcoins? Well, here's the quick summary of what we need to be eyeing off here. First of all, in orange, this orange line, it's Bitcoin's dominance. Now, I think the better question, rather than, hey, when's Bitcoin's dominance going to fall? When's alt season going to come from Bitcoin dominance falling? We have to, I think, be looking more towards, when is ETH going to be putting in its all-time high? Because when ETH puts in its all-time high, that is when I think Bitcoin's dominance will begin to fall. I think until that point in time, it's just going to continue putting in higher highs. Okay, you can see here, once we have ETH breaking all-time highs, here as well, and hopefully here too, we have Bitcoin dominance beginning to fall, and it makes sense. ETH is essentially Big Daddy altcoin. When Big Daddy altcoin starts pumping, it's going to bring in the confidence in the rest of the altcoin market. Now, the good news is we have ETFs, we have now staking legally available in the US for institutional clients. For ETH, we have a great incentive to actually allow this money flow to actually happen, just like with Bitcoin. So I think it will happen, and it's going to boost up the confidence for altcoins. But again, I think when interest rates are much lower, and we can observe that on this chart here, okay? Again, when ETH actually starts going up, it helps boost up this here, which is the altcoin chart, okay? This is alts going through their 5-wave bullish patterns, okay? 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Of course, wave 1, 3, and 5 are the more bullish waves. Wave 2 and 3 here, the red waves, they kind of give a little bit of strength back to Bitcoin as this chart goes up. But that's okay, because markets have to breathe. And when they breathe, they can continue higher. Now, why I point this out is because if you're worried a little bit about your altcoins right now, wondering to yourself, well, Kyron, what's the next move? Well, the next move actually is this first wave, okay? Because every single cycle, once altcoins break out of this downtrend, so back over here, and what's happening right now, when they break out of it, being this move and this move, that's wave 1. Now, I've studied wave 1 quite a bit, and wave 1, as a matter of fact, won't really put us to 10xing our altcoins. What it does is break even most of our altcoins from the bear market highs. So here's what I mean. For example, with Chainlink, okay? When Chainlink goes through this wave 1 pattern, it's going to do something like this, okay? It's going to come up and it's going to sit somewhere in between this zone, ideally. If it's a strong coin like Chainlink, it should do this, maybe even be a little higher, ideally. Now, what that allows us to do, just like Ondo here as well, okay, it should go back up to bear market highs, so somewhere in this zone here, it allows us to get rid of some of our weaker coins, okay? Near protocol, same here between this zone and this zone. And what that means is if our coins are kind of up here, okay, and we're either sick of the coins, we have no conviction, maybe it is a weak coin, it's out of flavor. In this wave 1, we can take our profits or even just break even on these coins. And like I said, when wave 2 comes in, again, wave 2 here is this red wave, the corrective wave. When that happens, altcoins will have a slight pullback and we can put some of those proceeds into the large caps because the large caps will pump next. based on history. Now, again, I'll keep you guys updated on the progress of things here, but when this S&P cycle begins to blow, interest rates falling, hopefully that helps cause the S&P cycle to blow, we're going to have altcoins going absolutely parabolic. And when that happens, again, wave one will be very crucial for us to shift some of the bad coins in our portfolio into the good coins. Or if you're someone who's really frantic right now, it will hopefully allow you to get out of the market and call it a day. All right. So guys, thank you for watching this far into the video. I hope you have enjoyed. And if you have, support all I do down there. Smash that like button. Again, and for today's emoji, I'm thinking, because I'm nerding out here a little bit, let's go nerd with the glasses. Let's not call it a nerd, actually. Let's just call it a smart person who wants to see alt season. I think that sounds a bit better, right? Talk to you guys tomorrow. Take care. Bye-bye.